So my job is to give talks about Unity. My name is Ciro Continisio, and I work as a lead evangelist, which is another word for developer relations or developer advocate. It's the same stuff. And as an evangelist of Unity, I'm always called to do technical presentations. I'm always called to show the editor as well, which I think is a bit of a challenging thing. So I rarely do presentations that don't involve Unity itself. I did one on storytelling, I did one on game design, but they're very rare. Most of the time I do technical presentations on, and specifically on one feature, which is, most of the time we have something new coming out and we need to talk about it and we need to teach it. And that can be a bit tough. So my argument here is that I think most technical presentations and feature demos are boring. I think they can be, and some that I see around. Obviously, there's very good presenters also, but sometimes people manage to make them really boring. So I'm trying to give a few tips on what I think, what is my formula. Actually, I don't think this should be something that everybody has to do, but this is the formula that I found that works during the years. I kind of like refined this formula. So the reason why I think some presentations are boring, I want to say, is because most of the time the pacing is very slow, especially when you're showing code. And they're usually too dense with technical details because tech, is complicated. So you want to give all the details and you end up making it very, very dense with information, and you lose some people, as you present. So my formula basically revolves around one thing: building a story. And so you switch your mindset. You don't want to present about the feature, but you build a story, and the story relies on the feature to work. But there's more to it. There's more around that feature. And then you guide your audience by hand. I say by hand through this story. And the number one is, this is a mistake that sometimes people make at the beginning, especially in our field, to show the feature in isolation. They take the feature and they build like a little tech demo, right? So they show how the feature works, and that's boring. That's really the boring part. Now I'm always striving to build practical use cases. So not examples that live in a vacuum, in an empty scene. I don't know if you're familiar with Unity, but Unity has this concept of scenes, 3D scenes, and you can totally show something in an empty scene, and that's what we've been doing for a lot of years, actually. Even me at the beginning, but I think we shouldn't do that. And the idea is to highlight your feature, but as part of a bigger scenario. And the bigger scenario can be, in my case, is usually games, because I deal with video games. So that requires me to build like a small game and then to use that game to demo the feature. It's a lot of work, but I think it really improves the quality of the presentation. And so you build this container, right? And then you have the demo within it, the tech demo within it. And then you build a story. And the story usually has like a premise, right? And something that I wanna highlight, that I wanna do. And then I explain how I got there. And while I explain it, I showcase the feature. It's kind of like a consequence. And because the feature can be really complicated, I say that the story has several steps. What I mean there is that I think we should stop. We shouldn't necessarily have presentations where that usually happens, where you give an introduction, then you jump into the engine, you demo the feature, and then you finish, right? And you get out. For me, it really works when you supplement your technical demo with slides, and you do it in a kind of like in an interwoven way. So you don't just do like slides, demo, slides, but you just like jump in and out as necessary. And this is something very challenging. It requires a lot of work to plan ahead, because sometimes as you build the demo, you realize that you need more slides. And so you go back to the slides and you create more, and then you go back to the demo. You tweak the demo actually to support the slides. So it's super, super challenging, and it adds a lot of work and preparation to your demo. But if you do this, you really, you're basically using the best tool at any moment to support your story. And that's what matters, right? The only thing that matters is the day of the presentation, what you're showing, not not all the work that went into it before. then what I think is also important to remember is that people have different skill levels. So there's, as you know, Ole was mentioning before, Unity is such a complex software, and we have such a wide audience that I never know who I'm going to present to. And when it's like small gatherings, like like user groups and stuff like that, I never know if they're students, I never know if they're professionals or consumed professionals, right? They have many years of experience. So I like to think of my story as a path, and then to have like kind of like access points to this story. So the idea that some people will not be hooked into the story straight away. Not everybody will jump on it straight away. Sometimes they will be too experienced and they already know where I'm going. But then I have something for everyone, along the path. And as long as I don't lose them, too early, they're going to be hooked later on. So I build like some entry points. It's like, and that means that basically I always start with a little bit of introduction on the feature. And that's what I'm saying. Like the people who are professionals and already heard the feature, they will be, slightly disconnected at the beginning. But by doing that, I get the beginners and I bring them on board, and then I push everyone through the story with me, right? So I grab the beginners, put them on the same level as somebody who already saw that feature, and then we can all talk about it, and everybody can follow on the same level. It's again a bit more work in preparation, and there's a lot of work to do during the presentation, but it's really valuable. Yes, forgot the text. And then once you have them hooked, right? Once you have everybody on board and you know that they can follow you, you want to keep them hooked, throughout the whole presentation. And that's what I say here, an act of balance. So one thing is controlling the pace. You don't want to go too fast. You don't want to go too slow. You don't want to do things that are too hard. But the hard thing is to understand what works for everyone. And so obviously one thing you need to do, which is really hard to do online, is to read the room. Like you really want to look people into the eyes, and you want to average that sentiment, right? Because obviously somebody might be just looking at their phone, completely disconnected, you lost them. Somebody else might be completely attentive. You don't want to focus on just one person, but you want to average, and you want to ask, did you understand this? Did you get this? And you see people like shaking their head. And if you see people like not shaking their head, then you know it's time to slow down. And you really need to do that. You can't just proceed. That's why actually I'm looking at your pictures right now. Like I readjusted the windows, so I have the slides on one side and your pictures on the other, because I want to keep seeing the faces. Otherwise, I'm just speaking to a screen, right? And if I see you shaking your head, then I know that I'm on the right path and that you're still listening. And that's what you need to do. Obviously, in a room, it's easier. Even if it's a big room, it's actually doable. You can scan the audience like back and forth. And again, it's kind of like stopping, listening, gathering everyone again, and starting again. And then you stop again, you listen. And this way you control the pace, and you kind of like harness this huge crowd of different skill levels and different attention levels. Don't be afraid of going back through the slides if it's necessary. Usually we do this thing where we're like, oh yeah, next slide. No, maybe you forgot something, you want to re-explain something, go back and reuse that slide. Don't be afraid, and break that flow a little bit if it makes sense to re-explain things for your audience. And then I think one thing that is really powerful is to reconnect to concepts that you touched on previously. So you mentioned something that you mentioned before during the presentation. I think it's super powerful, and it really makes people go like, that's what he meant before. Yeah, it makes sense now, right? So yeah, re-explain and backtrack through slides, reference previous concepts. These are all important. I think at the end of the day, you want something like this. You can never get everybody on board on the same level and on the same level of happiness. But you want to have the majority of your content that is just the right complexity for the majority of the audience. And you want to strive towards a picture where like the stuff that is too simple is the minimum amount. If there is something that is too advanced, I think is all right. Because people, obviously you might lose somebody with something that is too advanced, but most of the time they will stick to it, and they will think like, I'm gonna read about this later, or I'm gonna investigate into this later, and they're gonna power through. But if something is too simple, especially in online presentations, they're just going to disconnect and go away. It's a careful act of balance, but I think it's better to lean a little bit onto the more advanced, and then onto the too simple, and then you lose people because they think it's boring and that they're wasting their time. And then to help focus throughout this long journey, there's several things. This is mostly like technical stuff, technical details, I would say. But you really want to control the gaze of the audience and where they're looking. So in my case, for example, with Unity, the interface is often very complicated. It has a lot of details. So you want to strip the interface of as many details as possible. You want to close windows. You want to collapse panels. You want to focus on something in the scene which is meaningful to your demo. And you want to remove clutter. Yeah, you want to zoom into the editor. There's a feature that allows you to zoom. And I'm not sure if it's going to work here, but it allows you to zoom on parts of your screen. And that's very useful for focusing on something into the editor, so that that people are looking where you want them to look. And then sometimes you bring them to yourself, especially if it's a presentation in person, and then you bring them back to the editor. Capture the people's attention from the screen to you as you use your hands to support like a concept, and then you bring them back to the tech. Revealing items one by one on slides is also a good, simple trick. And I'm sorry, this is my personal belief, my religion, no GIFs. I'm very much against that, because I think GIFs, especially the fact that they can't be stopped, sometimes you want to talk over GIFs and the GIF is still playing in the background, and that can captivate the user attention instead of you. I mean, if you're a good speaker, you can also just like change slides and then you talk. But I think GIFs sometimes are distracting. My personal opinion, again, some people love them. Oleg wanted to know, when the demo breaks, what do you do? Honestly, there's no big answer to this. I mean, when it breaks, it breaks. There's not much you can do. When it breaks and you cannot recover, I can give you a link where one demo broke very hard on me. What you do, I think one good thing to do is not to linger on it too much. Like when you realize that it's broken and you can't fix it, just move on, because you don't want to waste even more people's time. So try a couple of times and then you move on. And if your demo is built as a journey, right? If it has this story, this story that is the spine of the journey, then you can probably move to the next stage, even if the demo broke, and lean on the faith of the audience and say, like, guys, this is the tech in preview. We're gonna fix it, but stay with me, and I'll bring you to the next step of the journey. That's my only suggestion that I can give when things really, really go wrong. As I was saying, having multiple steps might save the day, and having multiple example, maybe different example of the same thing in the scene. For example, in a Unity scene, maybe one breaks, but the other one works. So you jump onto the other, and that one works, and then you're back on track, and you can keep going. Or again, if you have the slides, then you can always go back to the slides and explain with words what you wanted to show. It's not the best, but again, it's a plan B. And then you want to wrap up with basically, you want to give this idea that the story continues past your demo. And so you want to give a few next steps, right? For example, you want to leave the audience with something to think about. The usual, end slide with, with this I mean, for example, if I just shown a tech and I show one concrete use case, then I give them a few hooks, a few pointers to other use cases, and say, like, what if you use this technology to do this and this and this? It could be cool. I didn't have time to explain it, but and that gives people something to think, to dream about, if you want, and they are eager to get started, to go back home and try the technology themselves. And for this reason, actually, in my presentations, when I manage to use this structure, I always get very few questions, because at the end of the presentation, they're busy thinking about what I just, pitched, and they don't ask, how do you do this? Because that's not the point. I'm not showing like the technical details. I'm giving them ideas, and then they're like busy thinking about those ideas, which is funny. And then obviously you want to give access to the demo if you can. This is usually challenging for us. It means that we need to use assets that we can actually distribute. So we can't take anything from the asset store. We can't take any third-party asset because then we cannot distribute the demo. But by giving myself these constraints, I then, enhance the presentation itself, because then I can distribute the assets, and that keeps like the story going. And I got so many people, like when I present in this way, coming back to me after months and months and months and saying like, that demo that you made was really cool. It inspired me to do this, and I re-implemented it this way. And they build a new tool based on my, initial idea, which is super cool to see. I have a couple of examples from presentations. I mean, the URL is going to stay there, or you can Google on YouTube or search on YouTube these ones. These are good examples where I managed to bring this story to the table. And I also have a bad example of one time when I was just asked to present a feature, and that was it, to introduce the feature. And that was super boring, I think. So watch the talk and, you tell me what you think about it. But it was literally just like going through each and every part of the feature and go like, and it does this now, and now it does this. Oh, by the way, we also added this. And I think that's the boring way to do it. But in that case, I couldn't get out. So not always you can follow this formula. That's it from me. I think I'm slightly over time. Oleg?
Yes, you are slightly over time. I'm just thinking, if you're giving the homework normally, what stops you from giving the homework to us now?
No, I mean, the action would be this, right? Like watch these talks and see a concrete example for yourself of what I'm talking about. It's actually pretty sad, because I still think that this talk here in 2017 is the best I've done that uses this structure. And, it's 3 years ago now. So it's a bit sad.